Hi, my name is Janelli. I play the viola as a member of the Patterson Music Quartet. Last year, we were fortunate enough to play for the Advocates for Children of New Jersey annual breakfast in person. This year, we are honored to be invited back to perform for you virtually. Today, we will be performing two holiday pieces for you. 'Tis the season and Santa Claus is coming to town. Thank you so much for supporting the Advocates for Children of New Jersey. We hope you enjoy our performance. Happy holidays!
As a former English teacher, I think about the Latin root of the word advocate and it being about the voice and to call. And Advocates for Children of New Jersey are a voice for so many children of New Jersey.
And when I think of ACNJ, I think of happy, healthy kids.
When I think of ACNJ, I think of their strategy and their compassion.
I love ACNJ. I think they are the best go-to, factual, nonpartisan, wonderful, wonderful organization. I always, when I'm looking for data and looking for information about the welfare of children, this is my first place to come to.
When I think of ACNJ, I think of how lucky the state is to have such a powerful advocacy organization for the state that really speaks on behalf of children everywhere throughout the state.
And ACNJ to me means an investment in the future of New Jersey. The children are our future, and ACNJ helps to ensure that the future is brighter for the children of New Jersey.
ACNJ has always been a champion of little kids, and to have them be concentrating now on the littlest of those little kids is very important to me.
ACNJ has been the fiercest, most courageous, outstanding advocacy organization that children and families can have. I am so proud of Seal and her work and the accomplishments that are made for all kids and families, not just for those who are well off.
Good morning. My name is Larry Fundler and I am a member of the Board of Trustees of ACNJ. It is an honor for myself and my wife Jody, owners of Jola Coffee, to be getting this morning started. And what better way than having a great cup of coffee? Let's jump right in. What goes into making a great cup of coffee? There's 6 factors that go into making a really great cup of coffee. Factor number 1. Good coffee beans, just like good food ingredients, affects the final product. Factor number 2, water quality. Filtered water is the most highly recommended type of water to make a really good cup of coffee. Factor number 3, recipe. Every good food product needs a good recipe, same with coffee. Grams to coffee, grams to water. Factor number 4, water temperature. Recommended water temperature for great coffee is somewhere between 195 degrees and 205 degrees. If it's not hot enough, you're going to under extract, you're going to get some sour notes. If it's too hot, you may over extract and end up with bitter notes. Factor number 5, grind size is critical to a good cup of coffee. Consider a pail of rocks and a pail of sand. If you have water going through the rocks and water going through the sand, it's going to go a lot faster through the rocks than it is through the sand. Same with grind size. If your grind size is too large, water is going to filter through too quickly, it's going to under extract. If the grind size is too small, it's going to filter through too slowly, it could over extract. Factor number 6. The timing of the interaction of the coffee and the water affects the final product. We're going to demonstrate a hand brew, and we like to end up between 3 to 4 minutes on the brew time for a hand brew. For the hand brew, we're going to use a coffee from Irga Hefe, Ethiopia, called Jabanto. This coffee happens to have notes of chocolate, blueberries, and honey. I'm going to tear the scale out to 0. I'm making a small. Our recipe for a small is 20 grams of coffee to 340 grams of water. And there's our scale. Now I'm going to come to our grinder. In goes the beans. And in with our coffee grinds. We're gonna hit it with a first pulse to get a little bloom. Open up the coffee grinds. Let that bubble up. There you go. Cheers.
As a former English teacher, I think about the Latin root of the word advocate and it being about the voice and to call. And Advocates for Children of New Jersey are a voice for so many children of New Jersey.
And when I think of ACNJ, I think of happy, healthy kids.
When I think of ACNJ, I think of their strategy and their compassion.
I love ACNJ. I think they are the best go-to, factual, nonpartisan, wonderful, wonderful organization. I always, when I'm looking for data and looking for information about the welfare of children, this is my first place to come to.
When I think of ACNJ, I think of how lucky the state is to have such a powerful advocacy organization for the state that really speaks on behalf of children everywhere throughout the state.
And ACNJ to me means an investment in the future of New Jersey. The children are our future, and ACNJ helps to ensure that the future is brighter for the children of New Jersey.
ACNJ has always been a champion of little kids, and to have them be concentrating now on the littlest of those little kids is very important to me.
ACNJ has been the fiercest, most courageous, outstanding advocacy organization that children and families can have. I am so proud of Seal and her work and the accomplishments that are made for all kids and families, not just for those who are well off.
Good morning. My name is Larry Fundler and I am a member of the Board of Trustees of ACNJ. It is an honor for myself and my wife Jody, owners of Jola Coffee, to be getting this morning started. And what better way than having a great cup of coffee? Let's jump right in. What goes into making a great cup of coffee? There's 6 factors that go into making a really great cup of coffee. Factor number 1. Good coffee beans, just like good food ingredients, affects the final product. Factor number 2, water quality. Filtered water is the most highly recommended type of water to make a really good cup of coffee. Factor number 3, recipe. Every good food product needs a good recipe, same with coffee. Grams to coffee, grams to water. Factor number 4, water temperature. Recommended water temperature for great coffee is somewhere between 195 degrees and 205 degrees. If it's not hot enough, you're going to under extract, you're going to get some sour notes. If it's too hot, you may over extract and end up with bitter notes. Factor number 5, grind size is critical to a good cup of coffee. Consider a pail of rocks and a pail of sand. If you have water going through the rocks and water going through the sand, it's going to go a lot faster through the rocks than it is through the sand. Same with grind size. If your grind size is too large, water is going to filter through too quickly, it's going to under extract. If the grind size is too small, it's going to filter through too slowly, it could over extract. Factor number 6. The timing of the interaction of the coffee and the water affects the final product. We're going to demonstrate a hand brew, and we like to end up between 3 to 4 minutes on the brew time for a hand brew. For the hand brew, we're going to use a coffee from Irga Hefe, Ethiopia, called Jabanto. This coffee happens to have notes of chocolate, blueberries, and honey. I'm going to tear the scale out to 0. I'm making a small. Our recipe for a small is 20 grams of coffee to 340 grams of water. And there's our scale. Now I'm going to come to our grinder. In goes the beans. And in with our coffee grinds. We're going to hit it with a first pulse to get a little bloom. Open up the coffee grinds. Let that bubble up. There you go. Cheers.
As a former English teacher, I think about the Latin root of the word advocate and it being about the voice and to call. And Advocates for Children of New Jersey are a voice for so many children of New Jersey.
And when I think of ACNJ, I think of happy, healthy kids.
When I think of ACNJ, I think of their strategy and their compassion.
I love ACNJ. I think they are the best go-to, factual, nonpartisan, wonderful, wonderful organization. I always, when I'm looking for data and looking for information about the welfare of children, this is my first place to come to.
When I think of ACNJ, I think of how lucky the state is to have such a powerful advocacy organization for the state that really speaks on behalf of children everywhere throughout the state.
And ACNJ to me means an investment in the future of New Jersey. The children are our future, and ACNJ helps to ensure that the future is brighter for the children of New Jersey.
ACNJ has always been a champion of little kids, and to have them be concentrating now on the littlest of those little kids is very important to me.
ACNJ has been the fiercest, most courageous, outstanding advocacy organization that children and families can have. I am so proud of Seal and her work and the accomplishments that are made for all kids and families, not just for those who are well off.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Tome, and I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of Advocates for Children of New Jersey, or ACNJ. And on behalf of the entire board of ACNJ, welcome to today's 5th annual breakfast. We're so glad that you're able to join us this morning as we celebrate the achievements of 2020 and the work still to be done in 2021. You'll find some important information and opportunities for you to help us in our mission to help children grow up safe, healthy, and educated. Feel free to chime in the chat box. This year, in the face of the pandemic, the ACNJ staff has undertaken some real out-of-the-box thinking to continue to be a big voice for little kids. This short video highlights some of the ambitious advocacy work that they've undertaken in this challenging time.
I'm Cecilia Zalkin, President of Advocates for Children of New Jersey.
Hi, everyone. This is Cynthia Rice.
I'm Mary Coogan, Vice President, Advocates for Children of New Jersey.
My name is Diane Delano.
I am Patricia Canning.
My name is Peter Chen.
My name is Alana Vega.
Good morning, and welcome to ACNJ's webinar.
Welcome to our session, Childcare and COVID-19 State and Federal Supports.
This virtual parent town hall meeting, Childcare and the Pandemic.
The Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP 101.
3-part series on reopening childcare.
ACNJ has been working with organizations throughout the state to promote an accurate census count.
And making sure our communities in New Jersey get counted.
On preserving connections and preventing child abuse during COVID-19.
Attunement and resiliency in the midst of uncertainty.
Remote learning for children with disabilities during COVID.
Welcome to the release of Unlocking Potential.
I am thrilled that my office has joined the Advocates for Children of New Jersey's leadership team in their work to strengthen and streamline our system of early care and education.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the finale of Celebrate Babies Week 2020. We're so glad that you could all be here with us today.
As many families have discovered these past few months, childcare has become a necessary part of our state's economic infrastructure, and it will be critically important to our economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis.
going forward, we know that as we bring more businesses back online, those businesses are going to depend on childcare.
For years, ACNJ has been stressing the importance of high quality childcare.
Early childhood is an extraordinary thing. There's the data, there's the statistics. We know what it does for the child, we know what it does for the family.
There is no workforce without childcare. There is no economy without childcare, and there's no new normal without childcare.
I just want to encourage the childcare directors that are listening today. Again, you're not alone. If you are a director, you have unclogged the sink, you have shoveled snow, you have worked in the kitchen, you have done the payroll, you've been a substitute in the classroom, and this, I don't think, is any harder than all of those other jobs that you've had.
This is your elevator pitch, and it's always that the census is easy, safe, and important.
Making sure that we have an accurate census is really important for getting our fair share for all of these programs that we care about.
We count. So who counts in America? Every 10 years, we answer that question by counting each and every person who lives in this country.
1, 2, 3, 4,
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. ¿Dónde vivo?
Me personally, I am strolling for childcare. It's the most important thing in my life right now when it comes to my kids.
I'm strolling for infant mental health.
I'm strolling for dads being seen.
I'm strolling for the support of the home visiting program.
Really wonder, what do the families with fewer resources and less privilege than my family had, what did they do? We barely could hold ourselves above the water. What about those who can't? What's the cost, the human cost, of not funding these programs?
It is critical to my work that I hear from parents. You are the experts on what we can be doing better to make this state a more affordable place to raise a family.
Thank you to the advocates for children of New Jersey for your tireless advocacy for children and for those who care for them. Keep standing up and making your voice heard and demanding action.
"2020 was certainly a tough year, but we're really proud of all we've accomplished. It's a testament to ACNJ's board and staff commitment to our mission that 100% of us donate to this organization every year. I hope that as you watch our program over the next hour, you'll consider making a financial contribution to ACNJ by going to acnj.org and clicking on the donate button. Remember, your unrestricted donations help ACNJ to be able to respond to the critical, immediate needs of children and families in our state. And now, as we say in New Jersey, for the woman who needs no introduction, Cecilia Zalkind, president of ACNJ, will introduce our next speaker. Seal?
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning and welcome everyone to our 5th annual breakfast. A little different this year. We would normally be greeting you in person, and this year, of course, it's virtual, but we're so happy that you were able to join us today. As you can see, it's been an incredibly busy year for ACNJ. Despite the challenges of working in an entirely different way, we have continued to advocate for children and families in New Jersey. We carried out a highly successful campaign to ensure that everyone was counted in the 2020 census. And we released a roadmap for our youngest children to ensure that children in New Jersey, prenatal to age 3, have the opportunity for healthy growth and development. This started with our Think Babies work in 2018 and culminated this year in a grant we received from the Pritzker Children's Initiative. We're looking forward to that work ahead. More than anything, we rose to the challenge presented by childcare and what happened during the pandemic. We have always advocated for children to have access to high-quality childcare. This year, the challenges to childcare were extraordinary. Because of the pandemic, childcare was closed and then reopened under dramatically different circumstances. And we wound up advocating, along with our many partners, for the basic survival of childcare. So in this year's breakfast, we wanted to highlight some of those advocacy activities and talk about what's ahead, some of the issues we focused on, as well as opportunities ahead for children. We realized more than ever the importance of advocacy on the federal level. We knew when we did our census work, we recognized that federal funding is so essential to basic needs of children like school meals, childcare, and health care. But we realized this year, because of the pandemic, that New Jersey needed federal stimulus money to survive. So we're very excited to have Bruce Leslie with us here today. Bruce is the president of First Focus, a child advocacy organization in Washington. He's been the president for 13 years, but he's worked on Capitol Hill for over 30 years. And he's a friend to New Jersey. I know many of you know Bruce. We've asked him to talk to us a bit about what's the landscape ahead on the federal level for children and families in light of a new president, as well as the need for continued federal support for the states. Bruce?
All right. So I want to thank Advocates for Children of New Jersey for inviting me today. I believe that ACNJ is one of the premier child advocacy groups in this country, and really applaud the work that you all do on a day-to-day basis in New Jersey. We've learned a lot from you. Other groups across the country have as well. And it's just always a pleasure to partner with you in so many ways on issues of importance to children in this country. So thank you very much for inviting me. And just wanted to talk a little bit today about the post-election landscape for child advocacy in this country. So wanted to start off with pointing out that on just indicator after indicator, we are not doing well by our kids. We can see after 2 decades of progress in terms of children's health, we're now seeing a rising uninsured rate in this country for kids. Child poverty is rising. In response to COVID, we've really identified problems in our educational system and in terms of broadband, things like that. We're also seeing rising child suicide rates, homelessness rates, hunger, just any indicators of importance to kids we're having increasing problems. We're also, as a nation, reducing our investments in our kids. So in the education policy, for example, we do a book called Children's Budget 2020 that we recently released, and we show that federal funding for education has actually declined by 12% over the last 5 years. And it's not the only area where there's been cuts to funding for kids, and I'll get into that a little bit more later. Also, as a nation, kids are often an afterthought when it comes to public policy. And this article by Colby Itkowitz in the Washington Post, it was just outstanding. Like every line in this article was terrific. But it really points to that just on issue after issue, we're not doing right by our kids, and kids are an afterthought. But also even sometimes when there is policy related to kids, we actually, in the case of sort of separating families and kids at the border, cruelty was actually the purpose of that policy. And so we need to, as a nation, really adopt a best interest of the child standard and ensure that anything that has to do with kids actually makes them their interests first and foremost, and never would you have a policy where cruelty would be the point. When it comes to child poverty, just wanted to highlight that the poverty rate for kids is actually more than 50% higher than that for adults. And that child poverty in the US is among the worst in the developed world. This is unacceptable. And a landmark report was issued by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine a few years ago that provided 4 pathways to reduce child poverty in this country by more than half. So we have a roadmap. We have the policy solutions to address this problem. And what we're lacking right now is the political will. And so this is something to really work on in 2021, is to really build momentum to do things like improving the child tax credit in this country and making it more refundable and lifting kids out of poverty. Doing that alone would actually reduce the child poverty rate in this country by about 40%. Kids are facing a certainly unique challenge right now with respect to COVID and the economic recession. And this is an article by Van Newkirk from The Atlantic where he talked about that. And it's sort of this false belief that kids are fine. Kids are fine in this recession. And we would argue, and as this article pointed out, every aspect of the lives of kids right now is being negatively impacted, every aspect. And so we need to get past this myth that the kids are fine. The kids are actually not all right, and really develop a comprehensive agenda around how we get out of this problem for kids, and really addressing the unique issues in this, both coronavirus problems, but also the economic recession that we're facing. This sort of gets at that, like there was this tweet by Elon Musk that said kids are essentially immune, and it's just not true, as we all know. But there's this false perception that we really need to overcome. And it's really every aspect of the lives of kids, from everything from obviously their healthcare, but also their family's healthcare, to things like child abuse and substance abuse, hunger, everything, that kids are being negatively impacted by, their education, et cetera. I really love this quote by Van Newkirk, where he said, the most likely outcome is that this pandemic, like most others in history, will once again uncover our most basic inequities. For children and their parents, that might mean that mortality rates are only the beginning of the story, which I think is very true. And I wanted to talk about sort of like why investments in kids are so important and why money matters. And this is data from our Children's Budget 2020 report. So first, we know that as a country, we actually invest less in our children than other OECD countries, by and large. And so consequently, it has huge impacts on things like child poverty, homelessness, child health, education, et cetera. And so we must really make kids a bigger priority in this country in terms of our investments. Unfortunately, we're actually doing the reverse. As you can see here, the share of federal spending on kids has actually declined by about 9% over the last 5 years. President Trump's budget would have cut kids by another $21 billion and actually eliminated more than 40 programs in the budget. Consequently, as a nation, if you think about your budgets as showing what your priorities are, well, we've crossed the Rubicon where interest on the national debt now exceeds all federal spending on kids. All federal spending on kids. Let me just reiterate that. So we're spending more on interest on the debt than all the investments we have across 200 programs for kids. It's not exactly making kids a priority. In fact, you could argue that both aspects of that line are bad for kids, because we're also then passing that burden of the debt onto children. Some data from the Urban Institute from their KidShare report is also instructive. One is that if you sort of don't change things, and this is an important thing, we really need to change the way we do budget and policy in our country around children's programs. And if things just stay an automatic pilot, you'll see that the Urban Institute projects that the adult portions of Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid would account for 71% of all growth in federal spending over the next decade, and that interest on the federal debt would be about 18% of all the growth, and children's programs would only have about 2% of all the growth. And if you take away Medicaid, the children's share of growth would actually be negative. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget also points to some other issues facing kids. And I think this is an important thing to think about, which is the process, the systems and processes in our budget process actually work against kids. And so if you look at federal programs for seniors versus kids, for example, you find that spending on kids is disproportionately discretionary. It's disproportionately temporary. It's often capped. It lacks built-in growth, and it doesn't have dedicated revenue sources. Senior programs, on the other hand, are the opposite. They're often mandatory. They have built-in growth. They're not capped, and they do have dedicated revenue sources. So as CRFB, which is a conservative group, points out, taken together, these features of the current budget process are increasingly leading spending on children to be crowded out as the burden we place on children rises. The good news, so now I've given you sort of the negative things that are going on for kids. So what should we be doing about this, and where is the public? And I think that this is sort of the good news story, which is the public's actually on our side. So first of all, we did an election poll with Lake Research Partners, and then what they found is that although the American people are deeply divided along every single line you can think of, so whether it's certainly partisan lines, but also gender, race, income, education, religion, geography, those divisions actually fall apart when it comes to support for children's issues. And consequently, I would argue that as President Biden takes office and as there's a very sort of equally divided Congress, if they're looking for places to find common ground, kids may be one of those places to really look. Fortunately, right now, as we all know, that kids are presently an afterthought in those policies. In a report we did in 2019, we found that there wasn't a single vote in the U.S. Senate that was specific to children. So that's something we really need to change, and we really need to make this point that if they really want to get some stuff done and there's common ground, kids' issues can be that. I really love this quote from Michael Freeman, and it's sort of about how kids are often forgotten in policy debates, and it's just that when people are thinking about policy, it's sort of an afterthought, and you can see that in a lot of policies when people are thinking about things. So, for example, the coronavirus task force in the Trump administration was dealing with various things, some well, some not so well, obviously. But one of the things that was very, very apparent is that we got to about July, and there was sort of this sudden recognition that kids would be going back to school, and childcare centers, were also facing problems. And so, whereas that should have been something that people really thought about way back in March or April, and been really putting together a plan. In the poll that we had with Lake Research Partners, it really highlights the positive. Some of the positive things that we can see in polling for kids with the public is, for example, we asked this question is around the best interest of the child. So should federal policy be governed by a best interest of the child standard? And what you can see is that support was 81 to 13. So that's more than a 6-to-1 ratio of support for this issue, for making the best interest of the child standard to be that which governs policy related to kids. I can't tell you, it's pretty remarkable. And what you can see is it's across the board. And one of the things that, our friends at Lake Research Partners says is, people are really cynical right now in this country, and they're very negative. And so 25% of Americans are against pretty much anything you poll on right now. They're so cynical and negative that the fact that our opposition number is only 13% really shows that we have the vast majority of the public, including people who are really cynical and negative. So at least half of them as well. So the numbers are really strong, and you can see very strong, whether Democrats, Republicans, or independents. We also, other countries across the world have children's commissioners. And this, we think, would be a really helpful thing to have in the United States to really have a body that's in the federal government focused on children, raising the voices of kids, looking at the issues that are important to kids, issuing reports, commenting on regulations, potentially even filing amicus briefs and lawsuits related to children's issues, and really highlighting and raising attention in both Congress and in the administration around all the issues that are key to kids. And what you can see is that, I mean, it's kind of complicated question to ask, and we ask people about, do they support the idea of creating independent children's commissioner? And you can see the question was to improve oversight and to investigate and make recommendations on ways to protect and improve the care and well-being of children in the United States. For some people, like, creating the idea of creating a new bureaucracy is a negative one. And so we were actually really surprised and pleased to see that 65 to 26% supported this concept without even really knowing a lot about it. And we feel like if we really could educate and create a campaign around it, we could actually raise some support in some ways among the public. So this was a really great number and something to build on. And we're working on legislation to do this. And like I said, that most other countries across the world have this. And it's really related to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's sort of an implementation idea. We are the only nation in the world who has not passed the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but we could at least move forward with something like this to really sort of raise the issues of kids within government itself. On sort of two policy issues I'll run through really quickly is that the child poverty target. We asked, should the United States set a child poverty target to cut child poverty in half in 10 years? The UK did this and successfully cut child poverty in half, sort of between 1999 and like 2016, actually, or 2006. And Canada has most recently done this and actually cut child poverty in half in like 3 years. So could we make this a national policy goal? And what you can see, support is overwhelming for this, 70 to 20%, and also very strong among Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So really good numbers for kids. So again, whereas on most policy issues, there's huge divides on all these various demographic lines. And what you're seeing here on kids is that there really is strong support for kids regardless. And I can tell you also that this is true, whether it's gender, race, income, education, and geography. So some of these questions that I'm showing you actually support in rural areas as strong as in urban areas, for example. So really, I mean, I really think that this is something to really build on as the public is with us. In terms of covering all kids in this country to make sure that every child in this country has health insurance. And so, to go back to the issue of, we're actually having rising uninsured rates, you can see that 85 to 12% the public believes that we should make it a goal to make sure that every child in this country has health insurance. Really strong support again among cross-party lines. So there are some barriers to action, obviously. There's societal barriers around sort of the parent bubble, racial generation gap. There's legislative barriers that we all know, which is around power and influence, structural obstacles in the budget and policy that I talked about earlier, and then and the fact that bipartisanship is rare. I think if that we could find a way to really get back to some of that, this would be beneficial to kids. This is an area where there is bipartisan support if we can get both parties to work together. The public education barriers are real. People are unaware of the importance of policy to kids, and coronavirus is a perfect example of problems for kids. And kids are often viewed by the media as soft news. We talked to the media about things like the article I showed earlier from Colby Itkowitz about all the problems at the end of 2019 for kids. What I didn't say is that she let us know that article was out there, and we were very excited by that. And when I went to look in the newspaper for it, I couldn't find it. And I looked again and again. And so then I emailed her and said, I'm sorry, you said it ran today. I don't see it. And she said, oh, it's only in the online version. And that sort of highlights it's an amazing article. It's unbelievable that article didn't run, but it really shows that even the editors were like, kids issue, we'll put it online. And then sort of there's the child advocacy barriers that, we lack resources and we're very nice people, and sometimes we need to push a little harder. And we also need to bridge silos and come together more often across issue areas. To talk about some of the issues that we're working on is, for example, really trying to get covering all kids. President Biden did have an agenda that he pushed in his presidential campaign to really reverse the issues that are happening with rising uninsured rates in this country. He had proposals that really didn't speak a lot to kids, to be honest. Like his proposal to lower the age for Medicare was to age 60. Obviously, doesn't really impact kids. And some of his other ideas really would not have had a big impact. And so we really need to build a campaign on how to get back to covering all kids and really getting back to making progress on this issue. And so there's definitely a series of things that ACNJ and other groups have all supported about simplifying enrollment, but also getting rid of some of the negative regulations like public charge and things that have happened in this administration will be key to really getting back toward making progress for kids. I want to highlight a little bit about, there's a whole array of other kind of policy things that obviously make sense, right? Talked about, improving the child tax credit to lowering child poverty and some other things like that. But I want to talk a little bit about structural issues that I think would be really important. I think that we are never as a advocacy field going to reach a point where we have just amazing political strength. So what we need to do is make sure that government is in and of itself is thinking about kids and really having to address the issues of kids more directly. Otherwise, kids will continue to be an afterthought. So here's a couple of ideas that we have that we're working on. One is basically forcing the creation of a children's budget at the federal level, and some states have this as well. And the idea here would be to direct, like there's a piece of legislation actually by Senator Harris, now Vice President-elect Harris, that would have direct CBO to create annual reports to Congress on spending levels for kids. There's another piece of legislation by your senator, Senator Menendez, that directs the Office of Management and Budget to make estimates on spending levels for children in the president's budget. And so this is something actually that Biden and Harris could do themselves on the OMB side. And so we're going to work with Senator Menendez and really encourage the Biden-Harris administration to do this. Another idea would be to create an Office of Children and Youth in the White House. There was a sign-on letter that went around and over 350 groups signed it, urging the Biden-Harris administration to create an Office of Children and Youth in the White House. It's probably unlikely because a lot of people are asking for that, but I think it's good that we've made this request and with the idea of like really lifting up children and youth in the executive branch. Even if we don't get that, I think that's something that we should urge to be a priority, maybe in the vice president's office or the first lady's office, or maybe creating an interagency working group on kids. We need to really figure out ways to really lift up kids in the executive branch. The third thing I talked about earlier was an independent commissioner for kids. That would really be a huge change. I talked about creating a child poverty target. And then another idea would be to create a new national bipartisan commission on children. This actually happened in the 1990s. And when that report was issued under President Bush, it was actually very instrumental in the creation of the child tax credit and CHIP. So sort of a new thinking and a new way to think about new ideas and fresh ideas to really move the children's agenda forward would be helpful. This is, the other countries do this. I really love the New Zealand Prime Minister. Just want to highlight some of the work that she's doing. She's really made kids a centerpiece of her being Prime Minister and focusing on ways to really improve their lives. And she recently was reelected overwhelmingly. So it really speaks to how, like, if you really make kids a centerpiece of your work, it's actually politically popular. We see in the polling, and certainly her reelection really affirms, like, if you do a good job and you really pay attention and make them a centerpiece, it's actually good for you politically. And she's doing the real work here. In her budget, she creates what she calls a well-being budget that is really focused on cutting things like addressing things like family violence and child poverty. It's really a really innovative way to really think about budgeting, and causes a real focus on children and families in the work that they're doing in New Zealand, and something we should really look to as possible ways to improve and reverse the course we're seeing on how we're investing in kids in this country. With that, I really just want to thank you all, and I would say that there will be a lot of agenda items that we're looking to in Congress. I would say that across the whole array of issues, I think that we can make some progress. And even if Congress stalls and we continue to see gridlock rather than some bipartisan work in Congress, I really do think there's a lot of things we can do in the Biden-Harris agenda to really move the ball for kids. And look forward to working with you all on ways we can really achieve that. And also just want to thank you all. The New Jersey delegation in Washington is really excellent. Cory Booker is like unbelievable when he speaks to kids. Senator Menendez has always been a huge champion for kids as well. We do a scorecard, and both of them are always champions for children in our scorecard. And then many of your House members, not all of them, but many of them are also really great on these issues. And so, and I attribute that to the work you all do to educating them and really pushing them to make kids a centerpiece in their work. And so thank you very much. And I really appreciate being here today.
Thank you, Bruce. And thank you for that stimulating discussion and the ideas for advocacy ahead. We look forward to working with you in the future. Working with our community partners has always been an important part of our advocacy. We rely on our community partners to inform our agenda, to help develop solutions, and to advocate in their own communities. This year, that's been more important than ever. And we have conducted outreach in a way that we never have before. As you can see in our video, we've done many forums, many informational forums, and we've engaged community partners across the state, particularly in advocacy for childcare. They have stepped up, they've told their stories, and they have made a difference in ensuring the survival of childcare in New Jersey. So many people were involved, and we appreciate the advocacy of so many. But among all those partners, 3 in particular stand out for really going the extra mile. Winifred Smith Jenkins, Megan Tavermina, and Stephanie Anderson really went above and beyond to advocate to ensure that childcare was recognized and supported for its essential importance to children, families, and the economy. And they did this while running their own programs during this challenging time. Winifred Smith Jenkins is the Senior Director of Zadie of the Oranges and Zadie's Nurturing Den in Summit. Winifred partnered with us last year in our advocacy to increase childcare reimbursement to address the increase in the minimum wage. She has grown into a powerful voice during the childcare crisis that was caused by COVID. She testified at legislative hearings, participated in many Zoom calls with state leaders, and she participated with us in educational forums that we did with our providers. She's appeared on TV, and her knowledge, experience, and business savvy has made her a powerful partner in advocating for childcare. Megan Tavermina is the Executive Director of the Learning Path in Chatham and President of the New Jersey chapter of the Association for the Education of Young Children. Megan also emerged as a strong leader and a powerful partner with ACNJ. She has organized her entire network to advocate, both in providing information to inform advocacy and in reaching out to state and federal leaders. Megan participated in every Zoom call that we held with federal and state leaders. And she put childcare in the context not only of its needs during the crisis, but even prior to the pandemic. Stephanie Anderson is the former director of the West Essex YMCA Peanut Shell Early Childhood Learning Center in Livingston. Stephanie is also a strong advocacy voice on the policy level, but added a great voice to practice since she ran her program as an emergency center during the crisis. She informed the state guidance on the reopening of childcare and helped us work with hundreds of providers on webinars about reopening, with guidance on everything from getting young children to wear masks to ensuring that everyone, children, families, and staff, were protected. These are three extraordinary women whose commitment, passion, and knowledge made us all better advocates and helped childcare during this incredible crisis. The other issue that confronted us as advocates this year is the recognition that racism continues in our country. ACNJ has been committed to equity since our founding over 40 years ago. Our mission is to ensure that every child has the opportunity to grow up safe, healthy, and educated. But we also recognize that too often children of color face barriers in reaching that opportunity. We have advocated for equity through our data by looking at how issues impact on children of color. We've looked at the overrepresentation of Black and brown children in the juvenile justice and child welfare system. And our roadmap for children prenatal to age 3 is entitled Unlocking Potential, because we see this as an opportunity. We need to invest in the early years to ensure that we achieve equity. That is the underlying theme of that work. But we also know, and we've, like many of us, have faced a self-examination this year about how we are acting when we talk about race equity. Are our actions enough? Could we do more? What does it mean? And I think in the context of that self-examination, we wanted to bring you a conversation today on race equity. And we're very happy and pleased to have Myra Taylor-Jones, Chief Policy Officer at 0 to 3 in Washington, and our national partner in our Think Babies campaign, and Michael Hill, a correspondent from NJTV, join us this morning for a conversation on race equity. What does it mean? Why is it important? And what can we do to ensure it for all children? Michael, Myra?
Myra Jones-Taylor, it is a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
You're most welcome. What is 0 to 3? What does it do?
So 0 to 3 is the nation's leading nonprofit organization committed to infants and toddlers and making sure that all babies have a strong start in life. We've been around for over 40 years, and we're so proud to partner with ACNJ there in New Jersey.
Why focus on this 0 to 3 age category?
Well, we know that babies' brains are developing faster than at any later point in life. We know that 1 million new neural connections are formed every second in the developing brain of a young child. And so all of the supports that are critical in that healthy development of a young child, from nurturing relationships with parents, from quality childcare, from paid time off, healthy nutrition, all of those things are foundational to all of those neural connections that I talked about. And if we don't have that strong support in place for young children, we don't get the kind of the strong outcomes that we want to see, the positive outcomes that we want to see later in life. So it's really important to get it right from the start.
And what kind of research is there to support this? Because people would hear this and say, well, you know, maybe 4 to 6 is a more important category.
Yes, we have been at the forefront of this research. You know, at 0 to 3, we translate the science and the research that has been around for decades now, talking about the importance of the early years. So we've gone way beyond questioning whether or not the science is there. It is there. We don't need any more studies to prove this. What we need is real action and people to understand how to translate that science into real action, both in state houses and on the Hill in Washington, D.C., where I live.
Tell me about the work. Tell me a story that demonstrates the challenge and the successes of doing this kind of work.
You know, we hear from parents around the country every day of the challenges that they're facing, especially right now in the midst of COVID-19 and the pandemic that the public health crisis, the economic crisis, and of course the racial reckoning that we're all in the midst of. And we hear that all they want is simple. They want their children to have a strong, healthy start. And they're really struggling to do that between the loss of childcare, the loss of income from their jobs, the loss of adequate health care or lack of access to adequate health care. We know all of these combine to create stress that has a wear and tear effect on developing young child's brain. And it's also really hard on a family, right? And we're not able to deliver on the promise of that young child's developing brain and all the supports that they need. And so we hear from parents all the time the challenges that they're facing. And so what we do is we take those stories to Capitol Hill. We talk with we have parents talk directly with their members of Congress so that they hear from them. They don't want to hear from me, some expert. They want to hear directly from their constituents to hear the challenges that they're facing. And then parents able to tell them the policies or the supports that they need to allow them to be able to do the fundamental things that they want to do to support their young children. So we know brain science and pairing that with advocacy and policy research, we know it's important, and we know it really changes policy and it changes outcomes for children.
Give me an idea of some of the successes you've had on Capitol Hill.
So, there's a lot. I mean, I would say if you think about nationally where we are, take paid family leave, for example. 10 years ago, paid family leave was something that was considered just a progressive issue. Republicans, conservatives didn't want to hear about it, right? Now, because of advocates across the country, advocates right there in New Jersey, and certainly what we've been doing at 0 to 3, this has become a bipartisan issue. We recognize that this is something that all families need to support their children. And also if in the event that you get sick yourself as an adult, to be able to take the time to care for yourself so that you don't get someone else sick, or so that you can really recuperate and then go back to work fully recovered. That's critical. And that is now a bipartisan issue because of the type of work that we've been doing and others across the country have been doing. It's just one of many examples.
You mentioned race, racial equality, race equity. What has 0 to 3 done in this particular space?
We know that 51% of all babies who are born in this country this year will be children of color. But we also know that because of systemic racism, inequality that is baked into the very fabric of this country, that many of those children will face barriers for the very fact of where they live and those racial inequities that are baked into our system. When you think about the fact that 51% of our children face those challenges, we have to address racial inequality if we are to have a strong, thriving country. What's good for children of color is what's good for this country. And so we have done a lot to make sure that people are aware of that. One critical piece of work that I'm very proud of is our State of Babies Yearbook. So our State of Babies Yearbook was first released in 2019, and it's a first of its kind resource that tells the story of how babies are faring across the country on several indicators that we track in good health, strong families, and positive early learning experiences. But what we did this year in 2020 with our State of Babies Yearbook is we disaggregated that data by race. We said, you cannot tell a complete story of how babies are doing in this country if you don't look at the different pictures of how those stories are told differently among Black children, among Indigenous children, among Latinx children, immigrant children, Asian American children. And so we were able to tell a far more complex and complete story by thinking about, by disaggregating by race and being able to say how children are doing. And we can see across the board in this country, we are not doing right by our babies. But guess what? We're doing far worse by our Black and brown children. And again, when you think about those rates, 51% of all children in this country are children of color, we can no longer act as if we can just do right by some of our babies. We can no longer afford to squander the potential of a single child, Black, brown, or otherwise.
Do these facts, does this scenario resonate, though, with politicians across the spectrum? Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Liberal, Conservative, whatever their flavor is. Does this resonate with those who make these kinds of policies and legislate?
You know, it really does. What we found is when you talk about this in a shared prosperity frame, when you talk about the fact that, again, 51% of our children are children of color, and they face certain obstacles that all children do not face, white children do not face, higher income children do not face. And then you think about the fact that they are future workforce, they are future parents. They get it, that it's important to eliminate these barriers. And so, you know, the more we talk about that, the more we talk about this in terms of our shared prosperity in this country, the better. This is not a question of who's deserving and who's not deserving. This is a question of the future of this country and making sure that everybody is equipped to make the best of what we have in this country, and really to be as strong and secure a nation as we possibly can.
I would think sometimes when people hear the word race, that there's this mental block that goes up. What's the difference between race equity and race equality as you're making some of these arguments and trying to win support for some of the issues you're advocating for?
Right. You know, when you think about racial equity, so comparing equity and equality, there's a really great kind of easy way to think about it. Equality is giving something to everyone equally, regardless of what they need. So you give everybody the same thing. Equity is different. It's giving everybody what they need to get to that even playing field. And so there are great graphics out there that show this. You might think about, you know, the level of stools that children of different sizes need to look over a fence. I've seen that, or different types of bikes. And someone who is in a wheelchair, that they need a different type of bike than a child who's able-bodied. So there are different ways to think about that. But plainly put, we need to make sure that we are equipping all of our children and all of our families with what they need to thrive. So if you're living in a community where you are more likely to face violence, and you are more likely to face environmental toxins, then we need to make sure that our resources are going to those communities, because we know the research is clear that environmental toxins impair healthy development. So we don't want to give the same thing to everybody, because not everybody needs what those communities who are facing environmental toxins need. So it's about targeted support. It's not about things that people aren't deserving of. It's what we really need to do to make sure that everybody is able to really deliver on the promise of this country and all that we stand for.
Myra, as you do this kind of advocacy, what other terms need to be defined to make the point that, look, this issue needs to be addressed?
You know, I think about childcare in particular, and really reframing childcare as a public good. When we talk about education, we don't worry in the midst of COVID that, you know, all of the K-12 schools are going to close their doors in the midst of the pandemic. But that is a very real threat that we are worried about in childcare. And that's because childcare is not set up as a public good. It's not woven into the public infrastructure in the way that it should be, especially when you think about all the brain science that I just shared with you a minute ago. So that's one frame that really needs to shift. We need to invest in childcare and that infrastructure the same way we invest in our roads, the same way we invest in our public education system, because that is how you make sure that children get to kindergarten ready, and that they enter the workforce with all the potential that, you know, that they should have in place.
Myra, how does an organization do this work? How does an organization get started doing this kind of work?
You know, so I think they're obviously, we've been around for over 40 years, and we started small and just kept on building on this science and this research. This is something, you know, I think about what ACNJ is doing in New Jersey. And I think it's really about meeting with your constituents, you know, the folks on the ground. If there's an issue in your community, and no one's talking about it, or they are ignoring it, or they're framing it differently, then this is something that people need to step up and say, not on my watch. I'm not going to let that happen. And it's not just about organizations and how you start organizations. It's how you activate and mobilize people in your community, people who care about this. So making sure that you have research, making sure that you are talking to people and understanding what their challenges are, and that you have a real plan to then address it by public awareness campaigns so people know that this is an issue, and then having real clear strategies and policy solutions that will address those challenges.
Myra, I noticed in the course of this conversation, you keep mentioning one word, science, the science.
Yeah. You said, what's the science? I'm sorry. Could you say that
No,
again?
sorry. I noticed in this conversation, you keep mentioning the word science.
Yes.
Tell me why.
Well, I think it's important that we remember that children are born learning, that there are reams and reams of data that show that there's evidence behind why all of this matters. And so I think it's important to talk about this in a nurturing frame, right? I think a lot of people talk about this. There was a long time about this as a moral issue. But I think it's also important to really think about this is something that there is clear evidence that if we don't think about all those connections that are happening, and if we don't rely on the data and the facts that show that if you don't form secure attachment or create the conditions for secure attachments for young children, that the brain actually starts to wither away those connections that are the foundation for success later in life. So science is, it's funny you asked that question. It's something that we take for granted, but there are amazing things that are happening in the developing brain of a child that we need to call attention to, that people need to understand, because people for far too long thought that, they had many beliefs that fly in the face of science, that children they're not learning until they're 5, that they won't remember traumatic experiences. And researchers have shown that that is quite the contrary. And people need to understand that the more you know, the better you will do, right? So that's why it's so important to think about that and frame that in that way.
Myra, I would imagine if an individual or organization goes up this path, that you do so with intention. Why does that matter?
Oh my goodness. You can't just hope that these policies will change. So many of the systemic barriers that we face in this country were created. They didn't just happen. They were created. They were designed. And so it is so important that as we try to dismantle barriers like inadequate access to healthcare, inadequate access to high quality early learning and to a workforce who is prepared to deliver on the promise of early childhood education, that we have to actually think about those policies that were put in place to hinder that, and then be very intentional as we try to dismantle them. Because it's not just going to happen willy-nilly or on its own, because that's not how it was created. It was created very intentionally. So we need to be very intentional, equally intentional, as we try to dismantle and build better.
Myra, data is important, but are there limitations to data?
I think you can overstate, people can rely so heavily on the numbers and forget that there are real people behind those stories. And so I think it's very important that you pair the data, that you pair the science with the lived experience of people, with the people who are most proximate to the issues that you're trying to solve, which is why we have something at 0 to 3 called Strolling Thunder, where we bring families from across the country to meet with their members of Congress. We equip them with we bring our data and all of the research that we have through things like the State of Babies Yearbook and other policy analyses that we've done over the years, and then you pair that with a family telling a very real life story. That is the secret sauce. That's how you move an agenda. That's how you compel policymakers to act.
Tell me about how an organization does intentional work in the area of racial equity.
So there are so many things. First, I think an organization has to be really clear and take on where they stand in this. If you think about leadership, if so many of the families that you're working with or the issues that you care about disproportionately affect people of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color, Latinx people, and then you look at your staff, you look at the leadership, you look at the board, and they're all white or they don't reflect the population, the group that you're working for, you have to ask yourself if you're doing enough. Are you staffed with people who might come to this conversation with a different perspective, with a different experience. Not to say that all people of color have faced adversity in their lives, but we experience things differently, and we bring different perspective that that is really important to bring to bear when you're talking about policy change. And then, so not just how you're recruiting and hiring and then retaining those staff, those diverse staff, and especially leadership, but then thinking about the work that you do, the language that you use is so important. We need to stop using language that is coming from a deficit model or from a place of belittling or even best intentions, but incredibly patronizing. Language matters. So the reports that you use, how you frame issues are really important. And then thinking about making sure that you are constantly on this feedback loop of talking to the people who are directly affected. If you're not doing those things, then you're not doing your job. You're really not, and you're not going to move the agenda in the way that it needs to be moved.
Myra, I'm curious about some of the roadblocks you may have encountered, and how did you work around those?
I think for very long, people have assumed that, I would say even conservative voices don't care about these issues. And what we have found actually is that when you bring the science, and I'm going to come back to the science again, what we have found is when you bring the science back and you lay it bare in this stark relief, if you talk about, you show the images of brains of a healthily developing child and that of a child who has gone without, and you put that in front of anybody, Republican, conservative, libertarian, everything that you listed, they get it. And they're able to see in real life or, in an image, the difference and what a difference it makes when you have policies that create the conditions for those nurturing relationships and all the things that contribute to the image of the healthily developing brain as opposed to the one that was not developing well. So I think, it's really about framing. It's really about knowing the science. And I think it's also about being full-throated and unapologetic. When we are talking about children, when we are talking about families, there should be no partisanship. No child asks to be born into conditions where their community is struggling, and no family wants to put their child in that position. But when we have what we have in this country right now, this is pre-COVID, but 100 million families are poor, are near poor in this country. This is not an issue of individual responsibility. This is a matter of a system that has failed millions of people in this country. And so we need to be clear-eyed on the situation that we're in, and we need to be full-throated, as I said, in making sure that we understand the policies and the mobilization efforts that we need to change those policies and those conditions.
Daunting work there, I would say, for some, but you managed to do it. And do you have to sometimes narrow your scope so that you don't get overwhelmed?
So first of all, this is a huge effort, right? 0 to 3, I work with an incredible team at the Policy Center at 0 to 3, and then it's amplified by our partners across the country, including those at ACNJ and other Think Babies partners who are part of our national initiative to make sure that all babies' potential is a national priority. But it's funny. Our problem is that we keep on expanding our agenda because babies can't wait. And so, I think for so long, people would think about the early childhood as an issue of childcare or pre-K. But we know that children need good health, strong families, and positive early learning experiences. And there are so many things that go into that. And then when you layer on where we are right now with COVID, we recognize the incredible challenges that families are facing. And so we have quite the opposite effect or challenge, which is how do we make sure that we can't take it all on. And so that's why we have partners. That's why we lean into other organizations who are focusing on these issues from a different vantage point and make sure that they are bringing the baby voice to their work as well.
Myra Jones-Taylor of 0 to 3, it has been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, likewise. Thank you so much for for these wonderful questions and for covering this issue. It's truly an honor to speak with you, Michael.
Most welcome, and thank you too.
Thank you, Mr. Hill and Dr. Jones-Taylor, for that important, powerful conversation and for reminding us of what we already know: race matters. 50% of children in this country are Black or brown, and they face systemic racism that has the potential to limit their contributions to society. This is unacceptable. Acknowledging these facts is uncomfortable, and discussing it is even more challenging, but it's important. We have to talk about it, and now is the time. ACNJ is committed to eliminating the systemic barriers that keep children of color from reaching their full potential. Showing courageous leadership, working with professionals, and raising the voices of parents, ACNJ's advocacy is changing the narrative. Together, we can change public policy so that all children, no matter what their race or ethnicity, have a chance to grow up healthy, safe, and educated. Thank you for joining us this morning. We've come to the end of our program. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. When we planned this event months ago, we didn't realize that today would be Giving Tuesday. I hope you'll consider making a donation to ACNJ on Giving Tuesday and letting your family and friends know. Maybe they'll want to make a match. Together, all of us can help the children of the Garden State unlock their potential and succeed. Thank you.